Hello, everyone. Uh, Good evening. So, right now we are facing some technical issues. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience caused. So, please wait for 5 or 10 more minutes. Our technicians are just fixing right now. So, please hold for 5 or 10 more minutes. Thank you. Hello everyone. We are very sorry for the technical issues. Uh, okay, so now a very good evening to all. So first of all, a very warm touch to all the participants who are currently present in our webinar and joining us from Tibet House YouTube Live. So may I first request everyone to kindly put your videos on and microphone on mute during the whole session. Thank you. So please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Tenzin, Assistant Program Coordinator of Tibet House, New Delhi, and I welcome you all to our sixth session of today's virtual program on Introduction to Buddhism, which consists of 24 different topics taught by different speakers with profound knowledge on Nalanda Buddhist Studies. And once again, we are very glad and honored to have among us Mr. V. Changla, who will be speaking on four measurables this time. In our previous session, Mr. Chengla has spoke about the wheel of life. So if you have not watched the previous part, please do visit Tibet House YouTube channel, in which you will find all the related videos. And now I would like to introduce today's speaker, Mr. V. Chengla. Mr. Chengla has studied his Buddhist philosophy and psychology from Tibet House, New Delhi, and he's also a naval architect by training and has over 30 years of experience in project management in Singapore. So before we proceed with today's session, I have one announcement to make. On 6th of July, that is on Wednesday, so it is on His Holiness the birthday, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama's 87th birthday. So we Tibet House, New Delhi, are very delighted to organize a conference on universal ethics, both online and offline. And the venue will be on C.D. Deshmukh Auditorium, India International Center, New Delhi, and the program will start from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. So those who are interested to attend on that day, you must register first in order to participate in the event. And you can register by visiting Tibet House website, that is tibethouse.in. I repeat, tibethouse.in. Thank you. So without taking much time, I now welcome Mr. Chankla to kindly proceed the session.
Thank you, Tenjin Mola. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me clearly? Okay. First, I would like to thank Venerable Geshe-la and Tibet House for the opportunity to speak today. The topic today is the four immeasurables: immeasurable loving kindness, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity. No matter who we are, no matter what gender, ethnicity, religion, nationality, political view, profession, whether we are rich or poor, we all share the same aspiration. We want happiness and do not want suffering. But no matter how hard we try, we are not free from suffering, and stable, lasting happiness is so difficult to find. But hidden within us, we do have the potential to achieve our aspiration. We do have the potential to achieve complete freedom from suffering and infinite happiness. This potential is known as the Buddha nature. At the moment, our Buddha nature is obscured by our mental defilements. But these mental defilements are not the true nature of our mind. The true nature of our mind is perfectly pure, just like the Buddha's mind. These mental defilements can be removed by applying the antidotes. And when all the mental defilements are gone, our Buddha nature will become fully manifest and we will become a Buddha. A Buddha is someone who has eliminated all the bad qualities and accomplished all the good qualities to fulfill their own aspiration and the aspiration of all the beings. One of the Buddha's qualities which fulfilled the aspiration of the beings is their perfect love. The Buddha's love encompasses all the beings unconditionally and without any bias. and it wants to accomplish the aspiration of each and every being by leading them to freedom from suffering and infinite happiness. While we, as ordinary beings, do not have this perfect love and affection that the Buddhas have, even our default, limited mind has the innate capacity to reach out to others. Even our default mind has the innate capacity to feel love and affection from others. At the moment, our ordinary love and affection is conditional and tainted by bias and self-interest. It arises automatically, without control, and is influenced by afflictions and self-centered attitudes. The objects of our love and affection are confined to a limited number of beings because of our mental defilements. This feeling of love and affection can take different forms, depending on the beings that we interact with. If it meets with beings who are deprived of happiness, this feeling of love will take the form of loving kindness. May you be endowed with happiness. If it meets with beings who are suffering, this feeling of love will take the form of compassion. May you be freed from suffering. If it meets with the beings who are experiencing happiness, it takes a form of joy. May your happiness be stable. And if you wish that the beings embrace everyone without partiality, this feeling of love takes the form of equanimity. May you be freed from the biased attitude. Just as we as ordinary beings have the potential to become the Buddha, our ordinary love and affection has the potential to become the perfect love and affection of a Buddha. Even starting right now, we can consciously and intentionally cultivate a better version of love and affection. Through practice, we can gradually expand our circle of love and affection to encompass more and more beings and eliminate the taints of bias and self-interest. One of the practices to expand our loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity towards an immeasurable number of beings is the meditation on the four immeasurables. The four immeasurables are widely taught and practiced in both the Theravadan tradition and the Mahayana tradition. In the Mahayana tradition, practice of loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity is built upon and further expanded to become the practice of great love, great compassion, great joy, and great equanimity. The difference between the two sets of practices is that while, for example, immeasurable loving kindness and immeasurable compassion generates the aspiration for the beings to be endowed with happiness and be freed from suffering, great love and great compassion go beyond that and take on the responsibility to endow all the sentient beings with happiness and to free them from suffering. When great compassion is generated, it inevitably leads one to make the courageous commitment that I shall be the one to free all the beings from suffering and lead them to infinite happiness. That is altruism. And altruism will always lead one to bodhicitta. I will become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Now let us look at the actual practice itself. There are two versions of this practice, a short version and a long version. Could you please share the slide, the first slide? Thank you. The short version is just these 4 lines. Shall we just read the 4 lines together? May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings abide in the state of equanimity, free of the biased attitude of attachment towards some and aversion towards others. Here, the sequence is starting from loving kindness, followed by compassion, joy, and equanimity. But we can also start with immeasurable compassion, followed by loving kindness, joy, and equanimity. For me personally, I feel that it's easier to activate my compassion first when I see beings who are suffering compared to generating love initially. And sometimes equanimity can also come first, especially in the long version of the four immeasurables. Equanimity can be practiced either as a wish for the beings to be free from bias, attachment, and aversion, or it can be for the meditator herself or himself to feel equanimous towards others, free of bias, attachment, and anger. When practiced at the start of meditation, it creates an even, stable ground on which we can build our genuine love and compassion. Now, let us look at the long version of the four immeasurables. The long version of the four immeasurables is an even richer and more powerful practice. I remember around 6 years ago, I downloaded an audio recording of a guided meditation of Geshe-la leading this practice at a retreat. And I was doing this practice from time to time. But eventually I stopped because I started doing the Buddhist practice and did not have enough time for both. But this is a very rich and powerful practice. In this long version, each immeasurable has 4 parts. And through the 4 parts, our emotion progressively becomes more and more intense. In the first and second parts, we are not getting personally involved. First, we generate the wish for the sentient beings to be freed of suffering and its causes. Then the wish intensifies and becomes an aspiration. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. But still, we are on the sideline. And in the third part, our compassion becomes so intense, and the suffering of the sentient beings becomes so unbearable that we can no longer bear staying on the sideline. And we take on the responsibility. I will take the responsibility that all sentient beings are free of suffering and the causes of suffering. Finally, because at present we are inadequate to fulfill this commitment, we request for blessing from the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas that we may be able to do so. This taking on of the responsibility is the hallmark of the Mahayana practice. Although the personal liberation seekers, meaning those practitioners who are seeking only personal liberation from suffering, but not Buddhahood, can also have immeasurable compassion. Their immeasurable compassion is not powerful enough to cause them to take on the responsibility of freeing the beings from suffering. But we should not take it to mean that their compassion is weak. If you look at the world today, you can see that there are many teachers and practitioners in the Theravadan tradition who are really compassionate, very kind, and who really try to benefit the beings as much as they can. And we should not forget that. In the meditation of the four immeasurables, the aim is not to apprehend loving kindness, compassion, and so forth as the object of apprehension. In some other meditations, for example, the meditation on impermanence, impermanence is the object that we seek to apprehend through the process of analysis. Similarly, when we meditate on emptiness of the self, through reasoning and analysis, we check if the self exists independently. And when we reach the conclusion, the self is empty, this emptiness is the object that our mind is apprehending. However, when we are meditating on the four immeasurables, we are trying to imbue our mind with these emotions. For example, for immeasurable compassion, we are not focusing on what compassion is, or what the definition of compassion is, and so forth. Sorry, Tenzin Lumala here. Thank you. So when we are meditating on immeasurable compassion, we are not focusing on what compassion is, or what the definition of compassion is, and so forth. Point of this meditation is to imbue our mind with compassion. May you be free of suffering and its causes. This does not mean that reasoning and analysis are not useful for the practice of the four immeasurables. To motivate ourselves to engage in this practice, we need to reflect on the benefits of loving kindness, compassion, and so forth. We need to engage in reasoning and analysis to overcome the hindrances and quell our self-centered attitude and afflictions. Also, to make our practice of the four immeasurables more complete and profound, we need to engage in study and reflection to fully understand what true suffering is, what the causes of true suffering are, what true happiness is, and what the causes of the happiness are. So, if compassion is the wish to dispel the suffering of others, and immeasurable compassion is the wish to dispel the suffering of all beings, including the strangers, including the people you delight, people who have harmed you, and people you see as your enemy. His Holiness has told the story of a Tibetan monk who remained in Tibet for many years after His Holiness went over to India. When this monk finally managed to go to India, he met with His Holiness. He told His Holiness that he was imprisoned and tortured by the Chinese Communist Party, who were trying to force him to renounce his religion. When His Holiness asked him whether he was ever afraid, he said yes. He was afraid of losing his compassion for the Chinese. This story is very moving, but at the same time, to be able to feel compassion for the people who are perpetrating harm upon you is so difficult, isn't it? And what about those that we see as very successful in life, who seem to be enjoying all the good things? Towards them, is it easy for us to generate loving kindness? May you be endowed with happiness or joy. May you never be separated from the success and happiness that you have. What do you think? Maybe, Demonak, could you stop sharing for a while? So you think that it's quite impossible that we can feel in compassion for our enemies or feel or rejoice in the fortunes of those who are way better than us or much more well-off or fortunate than us. Put up your hands. So does that mean that all of you think that is possible or easy? Could you share how we may be able to do it? Does anyone want to share? No one? Should I just ask
Can
for
you
you?
repeat your questions?
No, I was asking whether you think that it is easy or it's possible to feel compassion for those who have harmed us before, or those who we see as our enemies. Maybe we stick to that part first.
Mm-hmm. Host, can you translate? Kind of look the what?
Mr. Changla, can you please repeat once again?
Okay. Immeasurable compassion means compassion towards every sentient being. But what about those that from whom we have received harm? What about those people that we see as our enemies?
Oh,
Is it possible for us to feel compassion for them? Like the Tibetan monk in the story that I just told?
yes, yes, yes. Yes. From my point of view, it's not easy for the normal people, except those who are the spiritual leaders and who have already experienced in this religious, and those who are practiced for the compassion and forgiveness. normal people, it is impossible to compassion toward their enemies, because they have no idea, they have no, how to say, knowledge about the value of the compassion and forgiveness to their how to say, enemies. So it's a normal people, it is impossible. But for example, in Buddhist monks, monasteries, practitioners, those who have lots of experience, for example, His Holiness Dalai Lama, he can still how to say, compassion to everyone, including someone who put him exile. Still, he can compassion equally. Even somebody say he's a demon, how he say he's laughing. He never angry with them, and plus he always appreciate because of he due to this what was people. His Holiness told that he can improve. He can improve his compassion, strong and strong. So I was a normal is for me impossible, and maybe sir, maybe have good experience. It's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Tenzin Yoshila. What about Andre? Do you have anything to share?
Yeah, hi Richard. I think it's not easy because I guess the first thing that comes to our mind, if somebody harms us and we are supposed to show compassion, then we will be like, why should we show compassion to somebody who has just harmed us? But then of course, if we kind of try to process that, I mean, through trying to get a deeper understanding of the teachings and all that, then slowly, I think bit by bit, you will try to develop compassion towards that person, especially consider how by treating people in a bad way, I mean, maybe that person might be creating negative karma himself or herself. Then bit by bit, you will develop that compassion. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Andre. Okay, maybe we can share the next slide. Sorry, I got this table on the near and far enemies of immeasurables from a book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Robert Tupton children. I'm sharing it here because I think it's really useful. When we are not able to practice these positive emotions, because of the counter forces that are strong and they're stronger than our positive emotions within us. And if you look at the third and fourth column, the near enemies and the far enemies, do you find these familiar? So you look at, okay, the far enemies here are the counter forces that are counteracting the loving kindness and so forth directly. And when they are present, love, compassion, and so on cannot arise. The near enemies are the distorted versions of these four positive emotions, and they rise under the influence of afflictions and self-centered attitude. And these are even more difficult to detect than the far enemies. And so we need to really be vigilant and guard our mind against them, because sometimes we think that we are generating love and compassion, but actually we are falling into attachment and so on. And being able to identify and guard against both these enemies will really help us improve our practice. And if the question is, why should we feel compassion who have harmed us? Why should we even forgive them? Sometimes you see this happening even between family members who become enemies. And that is always so sad to see. So how can we generate, actually be okay to generate compassion, love and compassion towards those who have harmed us? I just have some thoughts. It's not that I'm the authority or in any way has any experience to share. But I think that if what we want is happiness and what we do not want is suffering, then we should do what is needed to bring about the happiness and stop that suffering. And we do have a rich store experience on the effects of the positive emotions such as love and compassion on ourselves versus the effects of negative emotions such as anger and hatred. We know what the consequences of positive emotions are and what the consequences of negative emotions are. So I think we can tap on these experiences and reflect whether we want to discard these negative emotions and keep only the positive emotions, no matter who the object of our no matter who we're meeting, whether it's someone who has harmed us. Does it actually make more sense for us, for our own benefit, to feel hatred and anger? Because if you look at the table where anger and hatred and the wish that the person receive harm are there, love and compassion cannot arise. His Holiness the Dalai Lama often said that if you want to be selfish, be wisely selfish. So even just for our own sake, for our own benefit, for us, for ourselves to have happiness and not to suffer, we have to think whether it's better to always counteract our anger and hatred, even towards those that we do not like, towards those that have harmed us before. And the truth is, it does not really help us. I think when we receive a physical wound, there's no point in causing the person who made the wound to have the same wound in return. It's better for us to heal the wound, to repair the wound. Similarly, when we have an emotional wound that comes from someone harming us, it's better to repair the wound, to repair and to heal it. If we carry this grudge or anger and hatred within us, it's just like a burden that weighs us down and fills us with negativity and stresses us out. And when we are able to forgive or at least draw a line and let go of this burden, we'll feel a sense of catharsis, sense of release. And I think that will be really healing. Now, maybe we can go back to, sorry, can we go to the next slide? Okay, let us go back to the immeasurable compassion and delve a bit more into this practice. When we talk about suffering, we are really talking about the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. And the truth of suffering can be divided into three types. The suffering of suffering, or evident suffering, which is what the conventional world sees as pain and suffering. Suffering of change, which refers to mundane pleasure. And pervasive condition suffering, which refers to being under the control of contaminated karmas and afflictions. And contaminated karmas and afflictions are rooted in self-grasping ignorance and self-centered attitude. And the causes of suffering that are mentioned here refers to the second noble truth, truth of the cause of suffering. And the truth of the cause of suffering refers to contaminated karmas and afflictions. Let us now look at the next slide. So we'd like to talk about these two stanzas from the three principal aspects of the path by Lama Tsongkhapa. A very short but extremely powerful and profound text. Let me read. set up in the current of the four powerful rivers. The four powerful rivers here can either refer to birth, sickness, aging, or death, or it could refer to the four afflictions of attachment, aversion, ignorance, and wrong view. The set up in the current of the four powerful rivers, tied by the strong bonds of karma, so hard to undo, caught in the iron net of self-grasping, completely enveloped by the darkness of ignorance, born and reborn in limitless cyclic existence, ceaselessly tormented by the three miseries. Thinking of your mother in this condition, generate the supreme mind of bodhicitta. Here in the first 6 lines, Lama Tsongkhapa is describing how the beings are suffering in cyclic existence. And Lama Tsongkhapa is instructing us to reflect on the suffering of the beings in order to generate bodhicitta. But however, we do not see that we ourselves are also tormented by suffering, in particular the pervasive conditioned suffering. And if we do not see that our suffering arises from the contaminated karmas of afflictions which are rooted in self-grasping ignorance and self-centered attitude, we will not even have the aspiration to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering ourselves, let alone in relation to others. So in order to deepen and broaden our compassion, it's very important for us to also reflect on the truth of suffering and the truth of cause of suffering in relation to ourselves. How the causes of suffering are within us and how they are giving rise to all these unwanted pains and miseries, and how the mundane happiness only serves as a bait to pull us over and over again into samsara, and how as long as we are under the control of our self-grasping ignorance and self-centered attitude, our suffering will not end. When we have a deep appreciation of how our afflictions, especially our self-grasping ignorance and self-centered attitude, are tormenting us, and how they are the cause of all our problems, then we can see that the beings, even those who we consider as our enemies, even those who we see as very successful and enjoying all the good things, we can see that they are also suffering within the grasp of their afflictions, the self-grasping ignorance, the self-centered attitude. And then this very profound compassion, even towards them, can arise. In the context of the Mahayana practice, the Bodhisattvas are seeking to achieve Buddhahood, not just to free all sentient beings from suffering, but also to lead them to infinite happiness. So there are two goals here. One, freedom from suffering, which is known as nirvana. Infinite happiness, which is known as Buddhahood. What stops us from achieving the two goals are the two kinds of mental defilements. The mental defilements which stop us from achieving the goal of nirvana are known as the afflictive obscurations, which are the contaminated karmas and afflictions. And the active seeds of these two, the mental defilements which stop us from achieving the goal of Buddhahood, are known as cognitive obscurations, which are the subtle stains or inactive seeds of the contaminated karmas and afflictions. So, the Bodhisattva's compassion is much broader than to wish, just simply wishing the beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Bodhisattvas take on a responsibility to free the beings not just from afflictive obscurations, but also from the cognitive obscurations. So this is one point in which the Bodhisattva's compassion differs from those of the personal liberation seekers. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. The next one. Immeasurable loving kindness. Here, when we talk about happiness, we're not just referring to good rebirths or worldly happiness. The stable and lasting happiness that we're seeking refers finally to the happiness of nirvana and Buddhahood. And nirvana and Buddhahood are achieved when we achieve the cessation of the suffering and the cessation of the two kinds of creations. In other words, the truth of the cessation of suffering, the third noble truth. And the cause of the happiness refers to the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering, which is the wisdom and emptiness. And this wisdom and emptiness, in order to achieve the goal of Buddhahood, needs to be driven by the force of bodhicitta and grounded on renunciation. So the more materials we have to reflect on, the more understanding that we will have, and the more it will help us to deepen our practice and make our practice more complete and profound. However, this does not mean that there's no benefit in doing this practice before we have all these materials to reflect on. Even the airline pilots train how to fly an aircraft in a simulator first, before they train on a real aircraft. Even though the simulator is not the actual aircraft, training in a simulator helps the pilots to progress towards being able to fly the actual aircraft. So each time we do the practice of the four immeasurables, no matter how simple our practice is, it leaves a positive imprint in our mind. And it is through an accumulation of these imprints, along with study and reflection, that these practices become more and more complete. The emotions become more and more real, more and more powerful, and more spontaneous. And finally, the four immeasurables are meant for us to practice, not just study or discuss. So let us do this practice together. Tenzin Lama, can we go back one slide, please? Thank you. No, go back. Yes, thank you. We'll do the long version of the four immeasurables. Okay, shall we start? Okay, let us take a few moments to let our mind settle down. Sit upright, relax your shoulders. If you're able to, cross your legs. Next, visualize the refuge field. Visualize all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in front of you. So loving, so caring. They are like our mother, looking upon us with so much love and affection, as if we are their only child. Next, visualize the bodhicitta field surrounding you. Your two kind parents on your left and right, your loved ones and friends surrounding you, those you label as your enemies in front of you. And if you're comfortable with it, and only if you're comfortable with it, you can think of the people you dislike, people that you see as enemies, people that you see as harm doers, and include them specifically in front of you. And finally, all the other sentient beings, including strangers, they are surrounding you and behind you. And you are living this practice. All the beings are doing this practice along with you. Okay? Let us put our palms together and recite the words together. As you recite, let your mind flow with the meaning of the words. And try to infuse your mind with these emotions and these aspirations. Immeasurable compassion. How good would it be if all sentient beings were free of suffering and the causes of suffering? May all sentient beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. I will take the responsibility that all sentient beings are free of suffering and the causes of suffering. Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, Please bless me that I be able to do so. Seeing that you're making such a courageous commitment, the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas have filled their happiness. And that happiness triggers their compassionate, omniscient mind to send forth light and nectar towards all the beings, including yourself. The mere touch of this light and nectar frees all the beings, including yourself, from suffering and the causes of suffering. Seeing that this miracle is happening before your eyes, you're intensely happy. Take 3 deep breaths, sigh of relief. Next, immeasurable loving kindness. How good would it be if all sentient beings were endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness? May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. The causes of happiness being primarily bodhicitta and the wisdom of emptiness. I will take the responsibility that all sentient beings are endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, please bless me that I be able to do so. Seeing that you are making such a courageous commitment, the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas have filled the happiness, and that happiness triggers the compassionate, omniscient mind to send forth light and nectar towards all the beings. The mere touch of this light and nectar endows all the sentient beings with happiness and the causes of happiness. Seeing that this happiness is happening, you're intensely happy. Take 3 deep breaths, sigh of relief. Next, immeasurable joy. Okay, first let us reinforce again our visualization, the refuge view, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in front of us, and all the beings surrounding us. Immeasurable joy. How good would it be if all sentient beings were never separated from happiness and the causes of happiness? May all sentient beings be never separated from happiness and the causes of happiness. I will take the responsibility that all sentient beings are never separated from happiness and the causes of happiness. Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, please bless me that I be able to do so. Seeing that you're making such a courageous commitment, the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas have filled your happiness. And this happiness triggers their compassionate, omniscient mind to send forth light and nectar towards all the beings, including yourself. The mere touch of this light and nectar causes all the beings, including yourself, to never be separated from happiness and the causes of happiness. Seeing that this miracle is happening, you're intensely happy. Take 3 deep breaths, sigh of relief. Next, immeasurable equanimity. Immeasurable equanimity. How good would it be if all sentient beings could abide in a state of equanimity, free of the biased attitude of attachment towards some and aversion towards others? May all sentient beings abide in a state of equanimity, free of the biased attitude of attachment towards some and aversion towards others. I will take the responsibility that all sentient beings abide in a state of equanimity, free of the biased attitude of attachment towards some and aversion towards others. Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, please bless me that I be able to do so. Seeing that you are making such a courageous commitment, the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas have filled with happiness. And this happiness triggers the compassionate omniscient mind to send forth light and nectar towards all the beings, including yourself. The mere touch of this light and nectar causes all the sentient beings, including yourself, to abide in the peace of the unbiased attitude, freed of attachment and aversion. Seeing that this happiness is happening in front of your eyes, intensely happy, take 3 deep breaths, sigh of relief. Thank you for doing this practice together. Now, since we still have some time, I'd like to mention some technicalities regarding what the 4 immeasurables are in a technical sense, for those who are interested. Our ordinary compassion is not immeasurable compassion. Tenzin Lamala, perhaps you could stop sharing now. Thank you. Our ordinary compassion is not immeasurable compassion. Immeasurable compassion is compassion which is accompanied by one of the 4 meditative concentrations of the form realm. There are a few ways to categorize sentient beings. One is to divide them into 6 types: human beings, demigods, devas, animals, hungry ghosts, hell beings. This way of categorizing the beings is more pertaining to their physical basis. Another way is to divide them according to the mental basis. In other words, they're dividing them according to the level of meditative samadhi that they have. So we can divide the beings into the 3 realms: the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. The form realm can be divided into 4, depending on the level of meditative concentration. The first concentration, second concentration, third concentration, and so forth. The formless realm beings have even higher levels of meditative samadhi, and they can be divided into 4: infinite space, infinite consciousness, vacuity, and peak of samsara. So there are a total of 9 levels. And when our love, compassion, joy, equanimity are accompanied by any of the 4 concentrations of the form realm, they become immeasurable loving kindness, immeasurable compassion, and so forth. Okay, I think that's all I have today for sharing. I think we have quite a lot of time. Are there any questions? Yes, Shantila.
So you presented in immeasurable equanimity, including taking responsibility to establish the others into equanimity. Is that the classically part of immeasurable equanimity? I mean, taking the responsibility, or is it just wishing everyone to be in that state?
I think when it comes to the Mahayana practice, when this is done as a Mahayana practice, it should include taking the responsibility. So when the Bodhisattva practices the 4 immeasurables, and the way we practice it just now in the long version, the third line is taking the responsibility to establish the beings in a state of equanimity. And also, I think just now I also shared that equanimity can be practiced in two ways. One is to wish that all the beings abide in the state of equanimity, and then taking the responsibility that we establish them in the state of equanimity. And the other way is actually to to have this equanimity ourselves. And this is especially so in the preliminary step for the Bodhisattva meditation using the seven-fold cause and effect. Yeah, so there are two ways for the Mahayana practitioners to practice this equanimity. And here we take the long version of the equanimity, and even the short version in a literal sense is in relation to others. Does that answer your question, Shantila? Thank you for the question. Yes, Georgie.
To me, it sounds like if we do this bodhisattva practice, we could never become an activist of any kind in the social and political sphere. Like, if all sentient beings are my mothers, if I see an animal being killed in front of me, then I'd do nothing. I'd be sorry for the person who's harming it. And I'd say, this is the animal's karma. Or if all sentient beings are my mother, and someone has put one of my mothers into jail and is torturing her, then I should say nothing. I should generate compassion for the perpetrators of the crime. Or if someone is raping my sister, there would be no political change, no social change, and also no economic change. Because I see this happening in the milieu I live in. I cannot approach these problems that I see around me of terrible destitution, of political victimization, and murder and rape. I cannot approach it with a Buddhist frame of mind. Apart from a natural reaction to do what I could do, I cannot generate that kind of compassion for the perpetrators. It's not my enemy, it's someone who is victimizing somebody else. I feel strongly about this.
Okay, thank you for the question. So I think the way I understand love and compassion is that it doesn't mean that we will be passive and not do anything when we see injustices and harm. In fact, we should become even more activists. Our mind should be really activated, and our actions also should be activated when we see people suffering. And if there's anything that we can do about it, if we have a lot of love and compassion, we should be really really motivated to do so. Having love and compassion doesn't mean that we will just let everything happen without interfering. In fact, one of my teachers, Venerable Tupten Children, said that it doesn't mean that we become a doormat and let people walk all over us. Yeah. Even for ourselves, it doesn't mean that if somebody is harming us, we will just passively accept it. And I think if you look at someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he's doing so much for the world today. So, although I think because of there are other constraints where he cannot come out and take political action, and also he's retired from the political arena. But I think it is definitely not the case anyway, according to my understanding. Yeah, because if I see someone who is suffering from torture, injustice, and I can do something about it, definitely I will want to do something about it. And just because I do not hate the perpetrator doesn't mean that I cannot help the victim. I hope that answered your question, or at least partially. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think there's a question in the chat box. Okay, the question is, can you repeat again, how do you relate the immeasurables to the meditative samadhi? Technically, the four immeasurables are these four practices: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, which are accompanied by the mind of one of the four concentrations of the form realm. So if you are practicing this, for example, compassion with the mind of the form realm, one of the four concentrations, then that qualifies as immeasurable compassion. And if you're practicing joy or loving kindness based on the mind of one of the four concentrations of the form realm, then that qualifies as immeasurable joy, immeasurable compassion. Whereas when we are practicing at our level of being an ordinary beings without any of these concentrations, then they don't become the immeasurables. Sherwin, I hope that answers the question. Are there any other questions? Or any other objections, like Joyaji's objection?
Then I have another. I have.
Yes.
Can I?
Yes,
May I?
yes, please. Yes, please.
For example, to go outside my country, this whatever some government is doing to Julian Assange, you know, Assange actually exposed the tortures that were inflicted on Afghans and other people in a particular war. He exposed it through WikiLeaks, and he's being punished for that. Those atrocities carried on, and they moved to another country, say Afghanistan, from Iraq. But now he has been given 175 years in prison, and he's been stripped, and all his clothes have been removed so that he doesn't commit suicide. And he's in a hopeless state. His father thinks he'll commit suicide in that state by not eating or whatever. So then, as a Buddhist trying to practice compassion, joy, equanimity, loving kindness, what should we do? Should we keep quiet? Is the question. Can we do something?
Whether we can do something depends on the practicalities. So I don't think I can comment whether it's within our ability to do something about it, whether because I do not know the details of the cases. But what we can do with regard to our mind and our emotions, definitely it's possible for us to try to feel love and compassion, and to try to quell our anger and hatred towards the harmdoers. And even if you are unable to do anything about it, it does not, I don't think it invalidates the practice of love and compassion. I'm sorry, maybe I have not answered your question very well. What do you think, Judge? It's okay?
I think
Yeah.
it's a very big quandary. It's a very big quandary to
Yes.
sit back and watch,
Yes,
and
yes,
do.
I know how you feel, because we feel helpless, like when there's a war going on and you feel that a lot of people are suffering and see that a lot of people are suffering, we can't really do anything about it. Yeah. So I can understand where you're coming from. Okay, I think Tenzin Yeshila has a question. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. Actually, it is not my question. I want to share my little experience with my Joy ma'am. Joy ma'am, two questions at all. One that is I want to share. Maybe it will be relevant. So, usually, if every situation we cannot, compassionate, but our compassion is studying ourselves, and it does not depend on the some situations coming make us compassion and what to say hatred. It's, for example, ma'am see many animals killed and patients, people are killed by somebody, and ma'am feel it is I can't do anything, so feel some sympathy or regret feel, right? But it is basically it is a very good feeling. But according to the as a person, as a normal person, even his holiness Dalai Lama and even Buddha uh, can do save the people's dying and people suffering such big things. But the in Buddhism main concept is try to build of ourselves to show the sympathy and compassion, how to passion toward optimistic nature, and then we can it can affect by nearby our people, nearby friends, and study from the even we can sympathy those who are making mistake and doing bad thing. We have to feel like sympathy for that because they don't know they're making such this big mistakes. And yes, now I want to share little my experience because I'm working in hospital. And when I'm first study, I'm so depressed because I see many days patients are dying in front of me. And actually, I'm a doctor. I cannot save some patients. I feel why I'm come to join this professional. And now, after that, when I analyze my Buddhism concepts, then I feel, oh, it's not my fault. So my job is I have to do my best. And then if some people's out of control, some patients die out of doctor's control, it is not our fault. So but main one things in Buddhism concept and useful for me is I can sympathy to the patient, how to treat, how to care the patient.
We lost him.
I think there's a network problem from Tenzin Shila side. Tenzin Shila, can you hear me?
It's not that while we're waiting for Tenzin Yeshila, maybe we can take another question if there's any.
Yeah, so is there anyone have more questions from the audience? Okay, so it seems like there's no questions from the audience. Okay,
Can we send a question later? We have to formulate a question. It was
sure,
about,
Joyla.
can we send it later?
Yeah, sure, Joyla. There's one last question from Miss Shanti Yasni.
Yeah,
Yes.
one thing we hear very often is people are very interested in self-compassion, and even many of the teachers, they have a lot of emphasis on self-compassion because people keep asking them about confidence and self-compassion. So I know we are in immeasurable compassion. We are mostly generating towards others. But is it how important it is to make so much emphasis on self-compassion, or should we do it just in the beginning and then move on to have compassion for others? So yeah, I wondered about that. The presentation, people just stop at the self-compassion part. I feel many people. So how does one skillfully tell them that, yeah, there's more to it than just building your own self-esteem and all?
Oh, that's a very big question. Yeah, I think self-compassion is also very important because when we talk about all sentient beings, it includes ourselves. And uh, just as all the sentient beings want to be happy and not to suffer, we have the same aspiration. And in the sense we don't take care of ourselves first, then we will not have any basis to take care of others. From what I understand, although my understanding could be faulty, somehow I think I've also heard it from other teachers and from His Holiness that somehow it is there's this problem of low self-esteem, yeah, especially among the Westerners. I'm not sure how true it is. Whereas I think uh, for some other nationalities such as the Tibetans, this is not really such an issue. So I think having low self-esteem does really cause a lot of problems for people, and it also if and also makes people lack confidence. And if they lack confidence, then a lot of things become not possible to do, including even practicing the Dharma. So I think it's from that perspective, and also of course from a really practice mindfulness practice kind of point of view. Yeah, they may not really care about generating compassion for others so much. Yeah. So I think depends on what the context of how people are practicing it. If it's just a secular mindfulness practice or secular practice, then I'm not sure how we can actually tell them, yeah, that's not everything. I guess we can just share that in Buddhism, not just in Buddhism, we can share with them the reasonings and why actually it's also important to have compassion for others from the point of view of making ourselves happier, from the point of view of being when we are compassionate and loving towards others, we are actually able to keep our ethics. And I think most people will say that yes, they want to be ethical people. So if we have loving kindness and compassion towards the others, then naturally is we will tend not to harm the others. And also from the point of view of interdependence, this is some point that it is one point that His Holiness is always stressing on, how the whole world is dependent on each other, and therefore it doesn't pay to actually harm others, and we should actually try to benefit others because benefiting others also results in benefiting ourselves. So these are just some points that come to mind. Okay. Thank you, Shantila, for the question.
Vichikla.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. If I may, just in the context of what Jayaji asked, there was a question and answer in His Holiness's book, Healing Anger, which was later published as Perfecting Patience on the 6th chapter of Bodhicharya Avtara. And I just found that useful. So if you are all right, I'll just read that out, if it's okay with you. I just thought I'd check with. Very
Yes,
short.
yes, please. Yes.
Yeah. So somebody had asked, how do we judge when a strong countermeasure is required? Because there was a discussion that there are situations in which you do need to have a strong countermeasure. So is required, and what will it be? Please describe what we can learn from your actions in response to the Tibetan genocide. So his answer was that one of the reasons there is a need to adopt a strong countermeasure against someone who harms you is that if you let it pass, there is a danger of that person becoming habituated to extremely negative actions, which in the long run will cause that person's own downfall and is very destructive for the individual himself or herself. Therefore, a strong countermeasure taken out of compassion or a sense of concern for the other is necessary. When you are motivated by that realization, then there is a sense of concern as part of your motive for taking that strong measure. In terms of the way we have been dealing with the Chinese government, we have always tried to avoid negative emotions. We consciously make it a point not to let our emotions overwhelm us. So even if there is a likelihood of some feeling of anger arising, we deliberately check ourselves and try to reduce that and try to deliberately develop a feeling of compassion towards the Chinese. One of the reasons why there is some ground to feel compassionate towards a perpetrator of crime or an aggressor is that the aggressor, because he or she is perpetrating a crime, is at the causal stage accumulating the causes and conditions that later lead to undesirable consequences. So, from that point of view, there is enough ground to feel compassionate towards the aggressor. It is through this type of reflection that we try to deal with the Chinese. And you are right. One can say that this is an example how one can deal with hatred and aggression. At the same time, we never lose sight of the importance of holding firmly to our own principles and adopting the strong measures that are necessary. Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to read. I thought that was very pertinent to that questions.
Thank you very much, Nurse G. Joya G, do you have something to say? Okay, I think your mic is off.
Well, I think you should unmute your mic.
No, I was speaking as a helpless individual. Can you hear me? Yeah. I was speaking from the point of view of a helpless single individual. When we are talking about very large world governments doing things like this. So it's not necessarily a Buddhist question, but as someone who's supposed to be Buddhist, then what should I do and think? It really is a problem for me.
Okay. So thank you,
Answer.
Mr. Yes, Jola.
He doesn't have to answer that. It was
Yeah.
just my explanation. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Vichangla.
So
Thank you, Georgie.
thank you, Mr. Vichengla, for answering all the questions, and thank you all the participants for asking your questions. So with this, we have come to the end of today's program. And on behalf of Tibet House, I would like to thank our speaker, Mr. Vichengla, for a very insightful presentation and sharing your valuable knowledge. And we are very grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and experience with us. So thank you once again. And I also want to thank all the participants for joining today's program. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tenzin Demongna, and I would also like to thank Tenzin Tomala for supporting the sessions, the last session, and also the Tibet House staff. And I would like to thank all the participants for your active participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.